This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Sharon Blackie, thanks so much for coming back on the podcast. It's really great to see you again.
It's lovely to see you as well. I'm looking forward to all the many things I'm sure we have to talk about.
Oh, yes. It's really good timing that we had this booked because you had hinted at something that you were launching, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And as we record, what is it, March 9th, 2026?
10th.
March 10th. Well, just last week, you announced this new online community called Nostos. And I just want to read the part of the invitation because it really grabbed me. It was like the way I described it when I reposted it was, this must be what it feels like when you're on a dating app and you find like that perfect match. It's just like, oh, yes, check, checking all the boxes. So if I'm going to join any kind of online community, this is as close to perfect as I found. So I just want to read
No
this.
pressure, right?
You better deliver on this. So this is part of the invitation. We're gathering a community of the curious, learners and seekers who would like to integrate ancient Western wisdom traditions, in particular the Platonic and the Neoplatonic, with tools and practices from contemporary, primary Jungian and post-Jungian depth psychology and related mythopoetic disciplines. Yes, please. More of this.
Yeah.
So this is a big endeavor. I mean, it's a long-term commitment. It's not a course, a 6-week course or something like that. This is an open-ended thing that you're inviting us to. And I'm wondering, why this? Why now? That kind of commitment scares the bejesus out of me, by the way. So,
yeah.
And well, it does me. Yeah, I get the sense that you like your privacy and you like to live your life and all of that. And so what was the push to do something like this?
Yeah, I swore back in 2022 after I did a year-long membership program based on my book Haggitude, for women kind of menopausal roughly, that I would never, ever do that again. So that went well. I really didn't intend to. I thought I was just going to sit at my desk and write books forever, but it just seemed, how these things just grow in you if you're willing to listen to whatever, we can talk about whatever it is, whatever is prodding you. And it began to feel more urgent. I would say it sprang up from an exploration I made probably just over a year ago, Christmas of 2024, that would have been, where I was very concerned about a new thing that seemed to be happening in the world, which was the conversion of a lot of men to highly traditionalist and right-wing forms of Christianity. Orthodoxy particularly. Now, orthodoxy, for clarity, doesn't have to be uber-traditionalist and right-wing, but, we were talking about, just to name names for this, we were talking about Martin Shaw and Paul Kingsnorth, for example, here in the UK, people with whom I've long had a relationship. And I was concerned about this because it seemed to exclude women, because it did seem to involve them in a very right-wing circle. And that whole business of it came in the context of a very clear, certainly in this part of the world, and I suspect in yours too, a very clear movement towards a search for meaning. As a consequence of the, just like, we were talking before we pressed the pause button about enshittification of like social media, I would say the enshittification of the world, certainly of the West. It's just people are just saying, okay, what are we doing? we don't seem to be doing very well. So that search for meaning, unfortunately, seemed to be pushing in the direction of traditionalist right-wing forms of Christianity, which is already a patriarchal institution that has done great harm, even though its original teachings are very beautiful. So I was just like, what on earth is going on here? Why are we seeing this move to Christianity? Why are we seeing this right-wing move? I did a lot of research into it. I read everything I could. And it just kind of seemed to me, really kind of from my own spiritual path over the years, that there was something in the pre-Christian traditions of Platonism and Neoplatonism, which fed, of course, directly into Christian thought and Judaism and Sufism in the Islamic tradition, but got kind of mangled along the way by the institutions. And I've long been studying that. And it seemed to me that, like, if we went back before the institutions, the patriarchy kind of mangled it, what could we find that was jewel-like and maybe something that would give us clues about how to live? And of course, as you will know, I know that you're a James Hillman fan too. James Hillman always said that his archetypal psychology, of which I am also a great fan, much more than Jung, I'm very much a post-Jungian, was heavily influenced by Plato and the Neoplatonists particularly. And it just seemed to me that on the one hand, you've got this ancient philosophy, which gives us a very simple kind of jewel-like kind of cosmology, but is a little bit contemplative and tends to the intellectual. But if you marry that with practices from depth psychology, which Hillman recognized fit with these old ideas, you might actually have a kind of grounded practice for the world that we find ourselves in, which is free of dogma, free of doctrine, free of institutions, free of all of that women can't do this crap, just... So, sorry, that's a long-winded answer, and I'm not sure I've even covered the half of it, but that's somewhere to start.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that kind of late life conversion to Christianity that I've seen with a lot of public, let's call them intellectuals or public people, thought leaders, people that other people follow and look to for some kind of guidance. I found that very disturbing. It seems to me a regressive move. And I joked with someone, it's kind of like going back 1,500 years or earlier. And I said, well, we got to go farther back, actually. Let's keep going back. If we're going to regress, let's regress even more. Let's go back 2,500 years and try to retrieve something that is more, I don't know. I think even just being of the place, like Neoplatonism comes from like the neck of the woods that my ancestors are from. And so it seems to speak to my soul more than a religion from the desert of the Middle East.
Exactly.
Which is just so bizarre that it's become the kind of de facto religion everywhere.
Yeah. It is a curious thing, and you're right. I mean, it sprang out of a long European tradition, and although, my ancestry is from Britain and Ireland, and Platonism and Neoplatonism, of course, sprang from kind of Greece, Rome, Alexandria, that kind of part of Europe. Nevertheless, it already pre-Christianity, or kind of in concert with Christianity, had a huge influence on thinking of the time. So it does feel as if even, I'm not from Greece. Greece is a slightly different country, but it's still part of Europe. It influenced the European tradition from the very, very beginning. It is very much a Western tradition with kind of characters and ideas that we can relate to. And that has always seemed important to me. That whole idea that something that emerges from the ground beneath your feet, from the air you breathe, from the lineage of your ancestors, is much more real And again, that's not to say that there aren't many things in Christianity that have proven to be fine. But the institutions have mangled them again, and so I agree with you. We need to go back before it all got mangled and say, okay, what were we actually doing here? And Neoplatonism particularly fed right into early Christianity. I mean, for better or for worse with the Gnostics, who kind of mangled it in a way that kind of led to a kind of diminution of the physical, a kind of, the physical is bad. Yeah, kind of.
The body, this world is a prison.
Body is evil, exactly. Yeah, which was like the bad bit of it. But there were lots of positive bits that Neoplatonism influenced as well. So there's so much, and it is actually at its heart really simple. There is this universal kind of ground of being, which they tended to call the One. You can call it God if you like, but I wonder if it is. It's just like, it's the thing that from which everything springs.
Yeah,
but what was
or sometimes called nous, right?
Well, nous actually springs from the One. So the One is kind of indefinable. We can't even understand it. It's just literally what is. And then it's almost as if one day it kind of wakes up and looks at itself and thinks, oh, here I am. And then you have the nous, which is the intellect or consciousness, which we might more think of in those traditions as God. But what's beautiful about the Neoplatonic tradition, which also got lost in many Christian traditions, and certainly the Gnostic, is that nous, that kind of divine intellect, then gives birth to the world soul, which imbues the entire physical world, the entire natural world, us. Everything is kind of saturated in the divine. And so this whole idea that the physical, is very transcendental and very intellectual and the physical didn't come into it, it's like nobody's reading it properly if that's what they think. It is absolutely, the divine is saturated in this world. We are a part of it, and we need to wake up to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The way I think of nous is just big mind, because it's clear that nature, that there is an intelligence there is like an ordering principle. And I can only think about that, with my own little mind as like a kind of a great mind that's behind all of this, and not contained in some body, not in some father figure, but just kind of mind. And then the body being like the cosmos. Yeah. Just like my body, there's an intelligent ordering to it all. I can't pay attention to all of that with my little mind. It's, even just thinking about the intelligence of my body, my ego like kind of shrinks, and like a kind of numinous trembling and terror. Like, it's just too much to think about all these functions happening in coordination with each other, and then to expand that to the cosmos. I mean, that kind of rhyming between the microcosmos and the macrocosmos is one of the things that I love about Platonic and Neoplatonic thought. That mind, the great mind, then kind of creates soul when it comes into the material realm. That's the same idea I have about myself, that, I'm before incarnation, I'm like a spirit. And when I come into this body, it makes soul. And that my job throughout life is to just keep making soul. That seems to be what I'm here for, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, and the beauty of the Neoplatonist view is that it's kind of, which is a bit different from Plato, but we won't go into all the detail, is that it's non-creationist. It's not like there's some guy up there saying, okay, I'm going to create flowers and pretty little birdies and they're all going to sing, and won't that be nice? It's just like it all emanates from this ground of being, and then it has its own kind of intrinsic intelligence, which plays out in the world in a non-planned way, and therefore is not static. It's always evolving. It's always in a process of becoming, and we are part of that and can influence it. And I think I like that better. And what I like about this, much more than I like about traditionalist, institutionalized forms of Christianity or any other religion, is at some level, and certainly for me personally in my life, that's kind of all you need. You don't need a book. You don't need a set of rules. I mean, you need to think about it. You need to read things which will, illuminate certain things for you, but you don't need that dogmatic, doctrinal, socio-political crap that emerges from the institutions. And that's what I mean by going back before the institutions mangled them. We just have this beautiful idea of a kind of a conscious, purposeful universe of which we're a part. We're in it. We're part of that whole divine thing. And yeah, that changes everything for me.
Yeah. I think too. I mean, I had a conversation with Tom Cheatham last week.
Yeah.
And what we ended up talking about was how both of us, he's got 20 years or so on me, but I was delighted to hear that he had been kind of working on his own personal cosmology, and that he saw all of his work going into Hillman and Jung and Henri Corbin and the Sufis and all of that as kind of a preparation or a germination of this own kind of very personal cosmology that he found himself kind of developing in a way. And I was delighted to hear that, because I'd been secretly working on this myself and, thinking, well, this is kind of hubristic, or it's very kind of, I don't know, it's limited and it's susceptible to be kind of just, non-disturbing to my preferences and things like that, but it kind of has just come through, and it's this thing. And so I've been thinking, all we really need is a kind of a provisional working cosmology. We don't need all of the theology and everything else that comes along with the institutionalized traditional religions. We need a good cosmology that helps us to be better citizens of this world. And the kind of the Neoplatonic, it kind of, if we look at it as a myth, this descent of the soul and the planets affecting our character and all of that, it's a likely story, as Plato would say.
It was one of those things. And of course, the problem with any kind of spiritual belief or religious belief is that it cannot be objectively proven. And so it's all about you. But all I can say is that my intuition is that has always been this. And I would say probably somewhere around 2010, for a little while, I did walk a Sufi path, which is why I found my way into this world in the first place. And, came across Henri Corbin's imaginal world. And then thought, where did this come? And found my way back to the Neoplatonists. And it is... What it is just it makes kind of intuitive sense. Mm-hmm. Makes imaginal sense. But also, if you go back to Plato, it gives you that beautiful, in his myth of at the end of the Republic, it gives you that beautiful sense of a soul having chosen to be incarnated, to live a particular life, which literally it chooses, and then to spend that life unfolding its purpose and unfolding its contribution, whatever that might be. It might be a beautiful garden, or it might be something really big. It kind of doesn't matter. It's kind of an expression of just one unique way of being human. And it's just that's amazing. It's just isn't that just beautiful? And that all ties into the kind of Sufi idea. It all ties into the Neoplatonism. It's just very simple. There's this ground of being. There's this kind of cosmic intellect, which just, I don't know, maybe it doesn't know what it's doing, but it's just making stuff happen. There's this world soul, which enlivens the whole world. And we came into this world just to be an amazing flower in a garden of all kinds of mad stuff. And I don't require any more than that. And maybe that's, as you say, it's kind of a personal cosmology, but it isn't in the sense that that's what was before the religious institutions got their hands on it and mangled it. And that matters. I think that those of us who cannot do the institutional stuff, and particularly a lot of women who are actively excluded by it, find a way in, nevertheless, to, a genuine form of belonging to this cosmos and a way to think about our place in it. And the other thing, just as an aside, is that Plato particularly, and the Neoplatonists, as well as giving you this kind of beautiful, very simple cosmology, this concept of the soul's immortality and the soul's journey through this life, also gives you practical ways of approaching it. The kind of philosophy as a way of being in the world, not just as a kind of intellectual exercise. Virtue ethics, for example. How do we think? How on earth do we make the judgments that we make? And that is also important today in a world that just like nobody learns that stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nobody learns how to think. Nobody is taught in school literally how to think. Why do I think what I think? Where do my judgments come from? What are my values? Are they good values? Are they just standing back and just like looking at yourself and thinking, what on earth am I doing in this life? That's also a really good practical consequence of Platonism in particular.
I mean, yeah, what you just described there, I was thinking, God, that's often what I do in my therapy practice, is helping people think better about their lives.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of having this, what I imagine to be a kind of Socratic dialogue of just like, just questioning, just, finding those ossified stories that are causing you stress and distress and, disruption in your relatedness and all of that. And just like questioning, get onto something that actually seems more true and connected to reality. And that is what I think of as philosophy, is the practice of philosophy.
It is absolutely the practice of it. Yeah, it always was a way of life, and then we put it in universities and made it a kind of, an intellectual exercise to show how clever we were. But that's not what it was ever supposed to be. It was supposed to be about the acquisition of wisdom, the illumination of wisdom by looking at yourself and challenging yourself and just saying, okay, what on earth am I thinking? Quite literally. And I genuinely do think we've lost that knack. And I like the idea that in a world that is clearly going to hell in a handbasket, where not very many people are thinking, particularly our leaders, that we can combine that sense of an obligation to actually just step back and say, okay, what are we doing? Alongside that kind of spiritual input, which tells us that it has a purpose and that we have an obligation, we have a responsibility. Do you know, one of the things that I've always said whenever I've taught this concept of the soul's journey from Plato, and particularly in the context of James Hillman's book, The Soul's Code, where he kind of developed that in a very beautiful way for quite a long time. And I always say when I'm teaching that it's really weird, and I might be really weird, but ever since I was a small child, I had this concept. I just had this kind of innate idea that this was not a free ride. I wasn't here to grow rich and retire early and sail on a yacht for 20 years, that there was something I had to not necessarily do, but be, that I had a responsibility. I had a duty. And we've also lost a lot of that, I think, in the world today, the sense that we are obliged to show up and to believe that what we do and what we think and who we are actually matters to that unfolding of the universe. And again, all this old philosophy gives us that. It matters. We came here for a reason.
Yeah. I was speaking to someone a couple of weeks ago. They had me on their podcast, and I don't know, I guess I haven't talked about this too much or too publicly or anything, but it came up in our conversation. I was telling her that, because she was asking me about the Soul's Code, because I've developed a coaching program for people on personal myth work, and it's very much inspired by Soul's Code and the myth of But I was telling her that ever since I was a little kid, feeling quite out of place in my family of origin, and even in the kind of the working class community that we were within, feeling like this strange duck, kind of out of, where did I come from? Why am I here? But I had this very strong innate sense that, my soul chose to be born into this family for a reason, to learn certain lessons. And I was telling her, like, we didn't have books of Platonism around the home. My mom had romance novels and Stephen King books. That was the extent of it. So I don't know where it came from. It just came in like a voice telling me, this is what you're here for. And that helped me with all of the challenges and struggles that I was going to. I was like, well, I don't know. I guess I chose this life for a reason. And it's my job to kind of see it through and try to learn the lessons as they're presented to me. And then, I come across the Soul's Code, 25 years later or whatever, and I read this myth of Ur, and it just like, it hit me like, yes, this is as good a story as any for why I'm here and what I'm meant to be here for.
Me too. Absolutely. The first time I read that, just like everything slotted into place.
Yeah.
Just like that's kind of, again, but it's a very simple thing. Yeah. You don't need a whole Bible or Quran or whatever. You don't need a doctrine and a set of rules around it. You just need you just need someone to say that can be a thing.
Yes.
And also to then teach you how to orient yourself towards it. And what I am trying to bring to the Nostos program is that Platonism and Neoplatonism have a tendency to be very contemplative practices, which are very beautiful. You need to sit and you need to contemplate kind of the nature of reality and to let it kind of come into you. You really genuinely do. Mm. But humans today, particularly, I think, sometimes need a bit more help to actually find our way into that imaginal world, which is the world of, that Henri Corbin so beautifully elucidated, which is the world. It's kind of the dancing ground of the world soul, the anima mundi of the ancient tradition. We need to find our ways in, and we don't always do it well. I certainly don't do it well by contemplation. It's not that I'm not a contemplative person, but
contemplation sounds so dry and dull.
Well, no, it's not. I think it can be incredibly beautiful, but I'm not. It's not my superpower. Whereas if I can go into an active imagination process in the Jungian sense, or I can more actively take myself into a process of reverie or even dream work, although I'm not greatest at. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that depth psychology, particularly in the post-Jungian tradition, as well as active imagination, actively gives us a way into the imaginal world. And so it seems natural to me to bring the two together, that if these ancient philosophical traditions are telling us, as one of the more interesting Neoplatonists, Iamblichus, said, we need a bit of help to kind of find our way back to the one, to kind of understand who we are and the nature of our soul's journey. And we need to find our way back into the imaginal world, back into what he called, of course, the world of the world soul. And these practices help us do it. So that's what I'm trying to do at Nostos. I'm trying to bring in all of the myth, all of the archetypal work, all of the dream work, particularly all of the active imagination, even that beautiful and fascinating and newly developing field of archetypal cosmology and astrology, which takes us right back to Pythagoras. And as you alluded to earlier on, that idea that actually the stars and the constellations are all part of this grand cosmic dance of which we're a part. How do we try to discern some of those influences? It all feeds in perfectly. Neoplatonism was kind of almost a kind of neo-depth psychology, compared to Platonism. It was very much more spiritual, but it was also very much more psychological. It was very much about the soul and how we grow the soul.
Yeah, and I think they were quite aware that they weren't so literalist as maybe some of the older traditions. They were quite aware that the myths were myths.
Yeah.
But that they served an important function for people in the society. Yeah.
Of course, and they understood that, the gods, what they thought of as the Greek gods, were simply personifications, which is a perfectly natural process. We are humans, we personify stuff of kind of these energies, these kind of divine energies at work in the wider cosmos. And it's like, okay, we'll call that Zeus, if you like, or we'll call that Athena. We don't think there is actually a goddess, with all this kind of breastplate armor and an owl on her head and what have you. It's not, but that's how our imagination can begin to kickstart itself, so that we find our way into the world of that symbol, of that myth, of that archetype. They were really, it's kind of weird. Everything in a sense that Jung and Hillman did, they'd already done back 2,000 years ago. It just took someone with that, or two people with that great understanding of the zeitgeist and what was required to translate it for a very different world and make sense of it. Now, Hillman was kind of curious because, and it's one thing that, I do have a couple of beefs with Hillman, and this is one of them, that he never got out of psychology. It's just like, that was his safe space. It's like, I know that he understood that the images were separate from us. They weren't part of our psyche. They had a separate life and what have you. But there's this great, I can't remember the name of the article now, but quite late on in his life, he did this talk about how he was really embarrassed, actually, that he'd never brought metaphysics into it, that he'd always avoided metaphysics. Mm-hmm. And he'd stuck with his comfort zone, which was kind of just like the individual person and the individual person's psychology and individual journey through life. And he hadn't actually gone to the G word, the God word, or the divine, or whatever. It's like, no, I can't quite go there. And it was kind of interesting that he gave that talk, which is published as an essay in one of the volumes of his kind of collected works. So I think what's interesting to me is how we kind of like, how we build on Hillman and bring back some of the metaphysics, because people are searching for meaning, and it's not just enough. Your own personal growth, your own personal well-being is just like, it's nice, but it's not what we're here for. We have something else to give. We have a bigger responsibility than just to our own soul's journey. We do have a responsibility to our soul's journey, but we have a responsibility to the greater unfolding and becoming of the world. And that's what I really am interested in bringing back. So we've had, the original, if you like, if I can put it that way, the Neoplatonist, the Platonist and Neoplatonist. We've kind of had it translated for a kind of more individualistic culture by Jung and by Hillman. It's like, okay, how do we add back that kind of cosmological sense of purpose and the unfolding of the universe at large? That sounds really grandiose, but you know what I mean. I'm not being grandiose. It's just there's more to it than just us, Even
if we just start with, 100 kilometer radius around where we live, it's nice to think in cosmological terms, but we have a place in this world, and it's participatory, and our individual soul journey is enmeshed with the world soul. Yeah. One of the things, there's a lot in what you're saying that resonates with me. One of the things Hillman would always say is psychology is so Germanic. It comes out of the German mind. And he's like, we got to go south, we got to reclaim the Greece of the mind, this more polytheistic, kind of naturalistic, participatory kind of mode of religion. Me getting into Hillman with my experiences in shamanic practices, yogic practices from the south of India, I was like, let's go further south though, because we need practices. And that was always my kind of thing, my limitation with Jung and Hillman and the others. Right. I agree. It's like, for me, active imagination as it's presented isn't quite ecstatic enough, isn't juicy enough. So I started to bring in drumming to help people get into a trance state and then let them go on these imaginal journeys. the use of plant medicines, even just like the herbs from our garden, like a little wild rose to open up the heart, but just part of that ritual of imbibing something, having the flavor of it, and thinking about how this is opening my heart. I just need more of that. I'm kind of like a shamanic personality. Like I just need those kind of earthy, juicy, ecstatic practices to get me off.
Well then I do recommend Iamblichus to you, because he was very much your man. So he was one of the later Neoplatonists who kind of brought into... so Plotinus was the guy who we think of as the first Neoplatonist, even though, of course, it was all a continuum, but that's a story for another day. And he was quite heady, he accepted the anima mundi in the world. He thought that the physical world was great. It wasn't like that. He wasn't a Gnostic where he was trying to... in any way demean it, but he was very much a kind of contemplative, intellectual, wisdom by rationality kind of a bloke. And then along came Iamblichus, who's a Syrian, a good while later, who brought into Neoplatonism what has been termed Theurgy, Theurgy, which can be translated as something kind of like magical, almost with a K in it, which is terrible. But what he was saying is, no, we do need these earthy practices to kind of draw the gods, the kind of intermediary gods, the angels, the diamonds, whatever you want to call them, that are part of this kind of world of the world soul or the imaginal world, to draw them to us, to give us inspiration. So he would absolutely be with you. You need to honor the spirit that's in a rock. You need to honor the spirit that's in a plant. And he firmly believed that the physical world was a way up. You can't get up. You can't do that soul's reunion with the one, or satisfy what the Sufis would call the longing for the beloved, without going down to earth, without going there through the earth. And I love that.
Yeah.
Through the world. Because one of the criticisms of Neoplatonism, particularly, I think, by people who haven't actually delved very deeply into it, is that it's all very transcendental. It's not. You can make it that way if you want, if those are the only bits you want to take, but actually it's not. A lot of it is actually very earthy and very respectful of the physical world, because it's like saturated with the divine,
Yeah. Well, and it's also, it's often a reflection of the scholarship that's been done on it by these very intellectual, Western, heady type dudes. I know. And every time I read something like that, I'm like, this person has never had an ecstatic shamanic experience, like reading Mircea Eliade, reading his book on yoga or shamanism. I'm like, this dude's never done yoga. He's never been to the jungle and drank ayahuasca or beaten a drum, or, I can just tell there's no experiential knowledge there.
But I believe, and maybe that's where, I don't know, maybe that's where we diverge, but I don't know that you have to do those uber ecstatic experiences. I think you just have to be able to, at some level, see into the soul of a tree, just by kind of like accepting that it has one, talking to it every day as if it did, and then kind of finding yourself into some bizarre relationship with it where you think one day it's almost waving to you or something. It's just like, I wrote a Substack a few weeks ago, which everybody thought was, well, some people thought was quite bonkers, but most people loved. And it's just like, so in my birth chart, and I'm not much of an astrologer, I'm very cautious about astrology. I know your wife is an astrologer. I honor it deeply in some ways, but not in others. But Jupiter is big in my birth chart. It's like one of those archetypal energies that is just like big in some interesting,
I'm a
complicated places.
As well.
Good. So I go out there.
For expansion, more complexity, make it bigger. Let's zoom out further.
But abundance and generosity too. Okay, we have to have that with it. So we've had a winter where Jupiter has just been, in this part of the world, in the north of England, Jupiter has just like been dominant in the night sky. And I am up generally at kind of 4 a.m. and I'm out walking with the dogs when it's still dark in the heart of winter. And there's Jupiter. And there was just one morning where I just think, oh, Jupiter, you are just so beautiful. And then I started to sing to Jupiter. There are a number of things that are kind of dedicated to Jupiter. But, from Holt's The Planet Suite, there are a couple of songs that have come from Holst the Planet Suite, beautiful Jupiter melodies. I Vow to Thee, My Country, for example, which is a big hymn here in the UK. And there was a band called, I can't remember the name of it now. Was it Manfred Mann? Who did Ode to Joy, the joy bringer Jupiter. And I'm standing there, with nobody around except the dogs who are just sitting there thinking, here she goes again, just singing up to Jupiter. And that to me is really, that's my ecstatic experience. I don't need a mushroom.
Yeah.
Look, so we can do that.
I don't say that's a prerequisite, but even that kind of direct, mystical relationship to the world that's not one step removed, that's all I mean. And you might need a mushroom to get there, and you might not. You might just be a naturally kind of shamanic person, and it feels completely natural and right to be singing to Jupiter. For me, I'm always singing to the ocean down here, and that's what I want. So that's all I'm saying.
I do too. Yeah, I do too. And what I'm trying very strongly to get across to people with this Nostos project is that those old Western philosophical traditions, not only do they kind of like not rule that out, they actively at their best encourage it. And we really have to go back to it. And I love that sense of deep lineage, because I do think that we are so good at throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Mm. And yes, there is something in that deep lineage where our ancestors did know things that we didn't, and we could possibly go back to them. But also, and this is also important, we also know things that our ancestors didn't, for better or worse. And so we have to be able to bring them into the future, picking up the best of what we've learned, which was, for me, is Corbin and Hillman and a bit of Jung, and then finding something really very beautiful and relevant for the times. Mm-hmm. Crafting something that kind of works and that doesn't fall into all the traps that we have spent 2 millennia falling in,
Yeah, it's absolutely necessary that it speaks to our current times and our predicament, the spirit of the times, but also the spirit of the depths, that it brings along our ancestral lineage. I just want to shout out, before we get too far afield, I want to shout out, you mentioned Iamblichus, Gregory Shaw's book, Hellenic Tantra, which is a yogic practitioner, pricked my ears up. And then, of course, meeting this character and going, oh, yeah, he's like one of my tribe,
Yeah. No, Gregory Shaw's work on Iamblichus is absolutely fundamental. And of course, he understands how Hillman and a kind of Jungian depth psychology process falls into that, very much in an intellectual way. Again, for Gregory, it's all about dream work. And it's just like, okay, I'm so over dream work. I mean, every Jungian in the UK does dream work, and that's almost it.
It's so bog standard.
Exactly. So what else can we do that's a bit more interesting? Do you dream? What else can we do?
I'm so with you. It's like everybody's starting up like a dream thing. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, dreams are great. Dreams are wonderful. First of all, can we stop analyzing them? Yeah. Can we stop analyzing them in public, please? Like, let's just talk about them over morning coffee, or around the fire. Just share them as stories. How about that?
And also to see, what's curious to me, sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, forgive me, but it's just like I'm hearing a number of kind of friends of mine who kind of like, they pay attention to their dreams and are obsessed by them. They don't always know what to do with them, but it's just like, oh, there's some really bad shit happening in my dreams at the moment. And I do very much believe that dreams come to us from outside of ourselves, that they're kind of reflections. They're images of what's going on in the world, that the imaginal world clearly is entangled with this world. And if bad shit is happening in this world, bad shit is going to be in some way tied up in the imaginal world, and it's going to come through to our dreams. So, yeah. Anyway, that was apropos of nothing.
And also, I have a different experience of dreams that I don't hear the Jungians or dream people talking about. For me, often what dreams feel like is that they're not coming to me. They're not arising from my psyche as a kind of symbolic communication of what's going on inside of me and my individuation process and all of that. It's my soul traveling to another dimension and dipping into this alternative reality that is happening. And I'm just getting this like window in. And then I come back and I go, where the hell was that?
I agree. I know,
what
I'm absolutely with
place. But it was already happening, and it's got a history, and it's on its own timeline, and I'm dipping in and I'm going,
just landed in it like on the moon. No, I agree with you, except in the case of big dreams, because I have had maybe 3 or 4 in the course of my life that have been really big.
Yeah.
Like either presaged something that I'm going to do, and it's like, oh my God, it's you. Or,
all I'm
or
doing
it's given me
is yes-anding. For sure. There's those big dreams that are very personal and have to do with, my own soul's journey, for sure.
Well, that's the numinous coming in, which can access, I think, that world. But I agree with you. And I think that what's curious is that many of us in these times are finding ourselves in that other world, that part of the other world, which is not very pretty. And I've written kind of extensively and researched extensively during my kind of more academic forays into it about the relationship between the Celtic notion of the other world and Henri Corbin's Mundus Imaginalis and whatever we might think of from other traditions. And that was exactly it. The Celtic otherworld was just like, boy, you didn't know what you were going to get. I mean, ostensibly it was a land of beauty and abundance and richness, but there were monsters around every corner, and you did not mess with it. You did not go in there lightly if you were invited even. And if you weren't invited, then, God be with you. It's just like, so I do see, I absolutely agree with you. I see the dream world in that way, but how many of us see it in that way? How many of us are kind of taught or guided or even given teachings or information which makes us step back and think, oh, okay, maybe that's the thing. So you have come to it organically. I came to it organically, probably both through really roundabout and, in my case, often quite fucked up routes. But it's just like, how do we pass that on? That possibility, that sense of possibility, that sense that there is more, that there are layers of reality that we're not even taught to see as possibilities. We're taught to think of them as madness. You get locked up in an institution if you haven't got the boundaries, to kind of keep it very, very tight. And that kind of interests me, how we, in a way that's not too esoteric, that's not too tied up with things that a lot of people don't want to do, like go to a jungle and drink ayahuasca, but just like ways in our everyday lives that we can be aware of these realities, not least because they don't then trip us up because we're not looking at them and we don't see the big stone in our way, but also so that we can they can help us inform our own soul's journey, which is what they do.
Yeah. And allow us to be fed by those realities, those experiences. And I think our souls are so desiccated in this modern world. And so I completely understand why people go to all these different things to look for some kind of meaning, some kind of depth in life, whether that's going back to a fantasy about an orthodox religion that actually has nothing to do with your ancestry, or going down to the jungle to become an ayahuasquero or whatever it is, or going to India to become a tantrika. I totally get it. I've been seeking for the same thing, and it's led me down some of those routes. But the interesting thing is going through down these pathways of yoga and shamanism, what it led me back to was my own ancestors.
Right.
And this deep reckoning with this cultural inheritance of Christianity and getting into the history of it and learning more about it, being someone who lives on Turtle Island, surrounded by indigenous people, seeing the consequences of what happens when we import a desert religion into a place like this, and all of its ideas about dominating the earth and manifest destinies and all of that stuff, what it actually does to people and land, and seeing, well, that's a story that just doesn't work. And I can't abide. So what else is there? How else do we make sense of this world? And what kind of stories encourage us to be, better humans?
Yeah, and that's why, again, I love going back to these kind of precursors to all those religions that took it in my view, like yours, wrong directions. It's just like, it just tells us that who we are and what we do matters to the universe, and gives us a kind of framework to think about why it matters and what good and moral choices might be that bring us into alignment with a good, flourishing life, and therefore a good, flourishing universe, and in a sense require us to do some of the hard work, because I do think for some people, and it's easy to be seen as hypercritical of these religions. I don't always mean to be, but for some people it can be a bit of a cop-out. It's like, okay, I just follow those rules. I go to church, I say confession, I go down the pub and I get drunk again, but I go to church and I say confession and it's all right. And it takes away the moral responsibility that we each have to show up and to think about who we are, and to really delve deeply into how we can be part of the world's greater flourishing. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure at their very best, a lot of these religions can do that. I mean, if you just look at, for example, if you lift the kind of figure of Jesus out of the institution, there's a lot of really good stuff in there that he was supposed to have said. It's like, okay, yeah, that's fine. But unfortunately, again, it's all got mangled, it's all got tied up. And I just love the idea of going back to this very simple structure. There's the universe, it's alive. It's alive. It's kind of, it's kind of imbues everything, including us. We're part of it. We've got to make it good. We've got a responsibility. We're here for a reason. It's just like, okay, that's it. Now, how do I tap into that more deeply? Because we have to accept that we can never know. We can never really know exactly why we're here or what is going on at these different levels of reality. See, I kind of like that. I'm weird like that. I like the uncertainty. It's a mystery. It's beautiful. It's great. I hate the idea that it's dogmatic.
Something that I can't wrap my head around. Oh, yeah. My God.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. I've been calling it, especially in speaking about Hillman's work, and I see it as a kind of Western Tantra that helps you kind of deconstruct all of the structures of the mind and open it to reality and all its diversity and complexity and mystery, actually. And what I've been saying is, for me, what it cultivates is a kind of radical ambiguity about the nature of reality. And that is so wonderful and exciting, because then everything is a possibility.
And everything is a revelation.
Yeah. And I can take any story, any mythology, and enter into it and work with it and see it as just another kind of reflection of reality, not the one great truth.
Exactly.
And, I can kind of be nourished by the story, even the story of Jesus. I can't throw him out. I mean, he's such an important figure in my childhood. Every time I hear The Little Drummer Boy, I well up with tears. Just something about that song hits me so hard. I think probably because I grew up with these stories, Right. And so for me, that's how I integrate it or incorporate it into my kind of wild pagan life. It's like, no, these are beautiful stories. And this guy, Jesus, I can really relate to his kind of rebellious side, throwing tables, cursing the fig tree because he's hangry after a long journey and it's not producing fruit for him. And so he gets kind of pissed off and curses it. It's like, that's the guy I can relate to, actually, not this holy white Jesus,
Exactly.
To watch or listen to the full episode, become a free or paid member by visiting patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness, or by downloading the Patreon app to your mobile device. Paid memberships start at just $5 a month and offer a number of benefits, including early access to all episodes, the full podcast archives, and the satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting an independent creator directly. Thanks.